Okay. So just for transparency, before we introduce you, I just want everybody who's watching this interview that Bill and I have known each other for since 2011, and we connected through social media for occupational therapy, and then later got to meet at conferences. Um, so if it seems like we know each other, it's because we do. So can you introduce yourself and tell us about your current role as an OT?
Sure, I can do that. So my name is Bill Wong. I am in California. So I've been in OTR for 8 years. Let's see. My primary study right now is in skilled nursing, but I have some experience in peds, so to speak. It's not much. It's only 3 months before that. And then I think I also had a year of failed private practice. So I don't want to mention that, but it's like that was sort of my journey before I ended up with the skilled nursing. And then since last year, I started teaching. So last year I taught at an OTA program, and then because my school, that's the school where I'm at, was like they have both OTA and MSOT. So this year I'm at the MSOT side teaching the master students. So last year I was teaching like a lab course, like a business lab kind of so to speak. So it's a sequence of 3 courses for lab. I taught the first one, so it's like fundamentals for OTAs in terms of doing ADLs, and also like, let's see what else. Oh yeah, it's like transfers, bevability, that kind of stuff. And then this year I'm teaching like leadership management course, and actually it was finished last week. Let's see, so that's what I do. And then my specialty in OT is in autism, social media, and recently I was also at TEDx Mix. And then let's see. Also, I've been in the RA with Sarah. So we talked about earlier. So I served as California Rep number 2 from 2017 to this past June 30th. So that was the end of my first term. And then my next OT leadership adventure is still to be determined. And then let's see. Another thing to know about me is that I'm the only OT. Not only that, I have spoken at 2 TEDx events, so I'm the only OT who has more than 1 TEDx under my name, but also the only OT person to ever organize a TEDx event. And let's see, another thing about me, I am a conference junkie. I think I have been to almost 50 conferences, OT-wise, across the globe for my career. I think, excluding this year, I have never missed an AOTA conference. I've been to 2 World Federation conferences. I've been to 3 Canadian conferences, 3 British conferences, like Royal College of Occupational Therapists, and then 2 OT Australian conferences, so like OT Australia conferences. And then, yeah, so pretty much I've been through the OT world. I've seen it all. I won't say I've seen it all that kind of deal, but it's like I've seen the world, so to speak, compared to a newer faculty. I know that is something that my students had intrigued, but I was like, wow, you've been to so many conferences. It's crazy. It's like, we want to be like you, so like that's another notable thing is that I am a conference junkie. So I think the high for me for a year is 8 conferences. That was in 2018. Yeah, I've done that. And I think another notable thing I did with conferences was when Jeannie Stoffel was our AOTA president, I sort of followed her for her farewell tour in 2016. So yeah, that was something that was very fun to do.
I think you're like the most well-versed. That's more than pretty good. I think you're probably the most well-versed in the occupational therapy world of conferences. I know people go to annuals a lot, but like to go to world conferences and other countries' annual conferences, I think you've been to the Canadian.
Yeah, I've been to Canadian 3 times. I've been to the Australian 2 times. I've been to the British one 3 times. So outside of people who are in WFOT leadership or are, our AOTA president, or vice president, outside of those people is like, yeah, definitely pretty well versed in terms of conference skills.
All right. So you have been very open in the OT community about your autism diagnosis. Can you talk about how that shaped your perspective as both a student and a professional?
Oh, very good point. So I would go back to the year before, actually. So the year before, I was in business class, and it was like there was somebody from our class above us who was a wheelchair user. Like she talked about like, oh, being a differently able person or a person with disability. I forgot what diagnosis she has, but I think it's either spinal cord injury or traumatic brain injury. I don't know what it was, so don't quote me on that. You know, it's one of the above that put her in a wheelchair user category. And then at that time, I was like, okay, you know what? I wasn't taking so serious about it, but I was like, okay, I gotta be. I think at that time it was like, oh, it was like, okay, I gotta be aware a little bit because like, hey, you know what? I never know who I'm gonna work with that might deal with like, oh, a recent change is like, hey, I might be somebody who just learned a diagnosis, whether it's autism, ADHD, or some other more traumatic ones like traumatic brain injury, spinal cord injury, whatever it is like, it's good to have in the back of my mind. And then when I found my diagnosis in 2010, that was August 2010. So which was like 3 days before I began my second year of school. So I think that was the first time that it hit me. It was like, wow, it's like now I have like a different identity. It was like, okay, I thought it was like normal, I don't have disability, and then also like I do have one. I was like, yeah, so it's like that time it took me quite a bit of time to get over it. And then of course the timing didn't help too, because like 3 days later I had to start second year of OT school. I think the timing of it was really rough too, because like most of my classmates, they passed their level twos, the first level twos, and I didn't. So I didn't want to be a buzzkill and telling them like, hey, by the way, it's like I didn't pass my level 2, and I also found out this, you know, because like at the time, it's like my classmates are pretty happy that it's like, hey, we one step closer to become an OTR. Then if they hear this, it's like, what is going on, Bill? It's like, what is wrong? It's like, you're a smart guy. It's like, what is wrong? I'm like, how come you fail fieldwork? And then like, how come you're this diagnosis out of like nowhere? You know? I didn't want to kill my classmates' enthusiasm for passing the fieldwork, you know? And then of course, like the fact that it's like the timing of it was pretty, I would say is pretty rough, because like there was like in second year, I'm sure you know in grad school, like there's a lot of readings, you know, for classes. So like, so that I spent, aside from reading for my class, you know, it's like I try to spend as much time as I could to find out about like what autism entails to me and stuff. So like, I think for 3 or 4 weeks, I was pretty mentally exhausted. The reason also is because like, I know that the following term is like, hey, you know what? I gotta get back on track because like, hey, you know, it's like they may have to go to fieldwork again pretty soon. So I gotta figure out like what kind of accommodations that I might need. Fortunately, I guess like from the academic front, I didn't really need much. I think the only thing I really need was like concrete directions. It's like, so pretty much I just tell my instructors, so like, hey, can you be a little bit more specific with your instructions? So that was what I needed from my instructors. And then I think with the fieldwork side of things, I was lucky that USC, which was where I studied, so I was lucky that they have some kind of like a bridge program, so to speak, like between a level 1 and level 2. So that's sort of get my feet wet in the clinical setting and sort of like help me be oriented to skills that I'm supposed to know for level 1, and then also like preparing me for level 2s, that kind of deal. So aside from building my confidence in terms of planning treatments and stuff, you know, aside from that, I've also used the time to sort of figure out like, okay, what accommodations I might need here. So that was that. But then, I mean, even with all the support that USC has given me, like, I think another thing I forgot to mention was that I also was utilizing their services, like their outpatient mental health services, because they do have it offered to students. They have like something called the Lifestyle Redesign for college students program. So I was involved in that as a patient. So I've been seeing DOT there for pretty much that school year. And of course the school year before, because I was struggling in school. Oh yeah, even in spite of all that, it was like, there was still one thing missing, was that I couldn't find anyone that has an autism diagnosis in OT. So I remember one day, I think it was 2011. I think it was like a few months after I met you at AOTA conference. I think it was the timing of it. It was like, I think I made a event on Facebook that says like, who in OT has autism? Because like, I was so hopeless. I was like in a Hail Mary mode, so to speak, because like, hey, I know my level 2 is gonna start soon. It's like, I just want to throw it out there, to see if there's anyone in OT who has autism. So then a caregiver from the UK, she commented to me like, hey, there's this guy, his name is Ryan, and he's an OT from the UK, and you might want to check out his webpage and connect with him because he's autistic. And at the time that she referred Ryan to me, he was in OT for 3 years. So he was, at the time, I remember correctly, he was working in adolescent mental health. So that was a good time. It's like, hey, it's like, it's worth a shot reaching out to him to see if he responds to you. So a couple weeks later, I think it's like, I waited for Ryan to reply to my email, and he did respond back to me, and he was very intrigued. He was like, oh, I didn't know that, there's somebody in OTE who also is dealing with the same kind of struggles that I did, so I'll be happy to connect with you. So I think during my time when I was completing my level 2s, it was like, I connect with him once a month, so to speak, like just to catch up with him in terms of like how I'm doing, like whether I'm on the right track or not, whether in comparison to where he was at the time. So finding Ryan actually gave me a lot of hope in a sense, because like, hey, it's like, I can do this, There's somebody who's a concrete example that he's an OT, Another thing, as I got more confident, I was confident towards passing my field work, like both of them, because I know I need 2 to make up. After I feel confident that I passed my second one, so he has been hinting to me, it's like, hey, Bill, I noticed that you're pretty open about your diagnosis. And then it's like, he started hinting to me, is like, hey, there could be some opportunities ahead of you if you have a license to become an OT. Because like, the fact that how open you are, there could be some opportunities, because like, I think that you could use the opportunity to share your experiences and also your perspective about being an autistic OTR. So that was sort of what motivated, so that was that. And then in terms of what got me motivated to actually becomes working on my public speaking skills, I'm sure you also know who she is, like Jacqueline Swartz, right? She is now the VLTC chair. Like we also had a long history because I knew her for 10 years. And I think is that, the reason why I knew her for that long was because, so we competed against each other in ASD 10 years ago. And she beat me fair and square. And I got to know her a little better. And then, of course, it was like, me being this good sport, is like, you know what? I think I got to be a good sport and just reach out to her and say, hey, congratulations, it beat me fair and square. Can we be friends? And sure enough, she did. She was gracious enough to accept that. And I think it's like, and then I think at the 2010 student conclave, I told her what I went through, and that she gave me a pep talk for like an hour and a half for the most part, to say, hey, Bill, it's like, I have a lot of respect for you before, because like, hey, the fact that you step up to compete against me, it's like, hey, you know what? That takes a lot of guts already. And then the fact that you are dealing with this after you, and then in between the time that we meet each other for the first time, that showed me that it's like, hey, you know what? You're overcoming a lot. And I just want to say is like, hey, keep on fighting. It's like, who knows? We may be either like competing against each other someday, or who knows? We may collaborate with each other someday. You never know, And then during that time too, is like, I seen Jacqueline have done a lot of awesome things. Like she got accepted to ELDP, and then she also had done a lot of conference presentations. I think this past year, I don't count this year, but like last year, she had like 10 presentations in AOTA. That's how crazy it was. I was like, and then of course now she is also the BLTC chair. It's like seeing the fact that Jacqueline has done so much in the OT world. I was like, you know what? I think it brought out the gamer in there. It's like, you know what? Game on. I am trying to I'm not going to try directly compete with you, but you know what? It's like, at least it's like we try to one up one another, so to speak, you know. I will say, humbly say, is like, she has taught me in a lot of areas, but at least in terms of TEDx, it's like, hey, you know what? I got her. I got her, and I think I got everybody else. And of course, social media too. I was like, I got her over most people in OT. So I was like, but anyway, that was sort of like the story in terms of how I got open, because like, especially seeing how Jacqueline conducted herself, was like, dude, my public speaking skills wasn't that good at the time, but I knew that, hey, if I want to be a leader in OT, I need to work on my public speaking skills, because like I need to be bold to like do presentations, because at that time I dreaded to do presentations. So I was like, okay, I need to really work on my leadership skills, because like if I don't work on it, I think that will be a major barrier down the line as a leader. So that's the skew. That answers the question, right?
On the student end, I was curious too, on the same perspective, kind of, you talked about mentorship and some accommodations as a student. How have you transferred any of those into your career as an OT?
Good question. So for me, I think there's some that I think I did adapt at the time. One in the SNF job, I think, is that, you know, like the site buildings and stuff was like, I think probably we sort of worked it out as like, hey, you know what? Just give me a day or two to see if it's like very hard for me. So I was like, that is that, you know? So therefore, it's like, if it's a building that I can tolerate, that's like, okay, you know what? If you place me there for a week, that's fine with me. But if it's a building that's a little too hard for me, I was like, okay, you know what? I can't do it. Please don't place me in that building again. So that's accommodations.
Has
And
your
then
employer, oh, sorry. I was just going to ask, has your employer been pretty good about allowing for those accommodations?
yeah, we have. I guess it's like we have, because like we're a contract company. So it's like, I just being adamant about it. I think that was very helpful. And then I think in terms of teaching, I think that concrete and timely feedback, which I guess is like, implicitly they already knew in terms of when they hired me. It's like they know me pretty well already. The school, they know me pretty well already. So I think it's like implicitly they told me the feedback. I think that was very helpful. And then of course being the RA too. I think in the RA I know that quote unquote I got some accommodations in a sense. It's like, hey, you know, it's like for me I'm very good with terms of my audio processing. That's not a problem. But it's like the social communication stuff, you know. So I remember when Debbie was the RA speaker and stuff. I think when I did some outline things on Twitter, on Facebook and stuff, she emailed pretty quickly and say, Bill, you know, it's like, hey, you are an RA right now. Like you are, what you said a bit is like, it's a little out of line. And then I remember there was one thread on OT for OT. I think it was started by Chris Otero about the single point of entry and stuff. I think I commented on it on behalf of, I mean, just on from an individual's perspective. And then I think I quickly got an email about like, Bill, you shouldn't do this and stuff, you know? Or when you comment on stuff like this, I mean, like, we understand that you're an admin on the OT for OT group, but at the same time is that, hey, you know, you gotta be a little bit careful because like your opinion, your comments is representing California OTs. So that is sort of like the kind of comment that definitely is like, I think the RA, they did a very good job in terms of keeping me in check for the first year. And I think that was the learning curve, I guess, because I think that was also my first role in terms of being an AOTA elected official. I mean, I sort of knew a bit in terms of how to conduct myself, but the social communication aspect, I think that was the part that is like work in progress for me. I think that answers your question, right?
Yes, and I would agree. Like the RA is your first year is a pretty big learning curve of just learning a lot of new things and professionalism and how to present yourself and your constituents for what you're doing. And there's nothing else in OT that kind of prepares you for that. So they do a really great job of mentoring their leaders. So another question I have is, how has being autistic impacted your approach to therapy? Like, do you think it is changes how you provide therapy as opposed to another OT, especially I guess with if you were working with clients with autism? Do you think your perspective would be very different?
That's a good question. In the SNF setting, actually, I've not seen that much. I've only seen one. But I do say this. I think for me, my perspective right now, I don't know if you know COTAD. So actually, I got paired with two mentees for the minority mentorship program. So one of them is actually autistic. So for me, it's like, I think for me, I will answer from that perspective because now I have this experience right now. I think it's like me being very empathetic because like, hey, it's like realistic goal setting. I think that's really helped me as a mentor for that mentee. I think that was really helpful because I think one of the goals that she want to work on is like, oh, I want to work on my leadership skills, because that's one of her goals. And then I think the other day I had her join a TED Circle and of course I also had her join the community of leaders in AOTA as the more service learning part to have work on leadership skills. Then the TED Circle, it was part of the group activity because like everybody in the group would be responsible for checking it out because it was me who suggested it. And then that was sort of from my observation, it was like, okay, she lacks some assertiveness, in conversations, her social confidence with new people are not there. So I was like, okay, you know what? I was like, it's almost like I gotta play devil's advocate here. It's like, yeah, this is not a good per se, this is like, what, this is something that we need to work on. But at the same time, it's like, you know what, I'm being empathetic because like, hey, you know what? When I was in her shoes, I had the same thing happen, so like I was not as comfortable in very new surroundings like this. So especially like the statistical that I asked her to join is like, aside from me, she knew nobody else. So I was like, okay, you know what? I was just say is like, hey, maybe I need to have a conversation to her about it. Like, I think it was next week or something because our mentorship meeting is next week. I've been telling her is like, okay, you know what? The fact that you joined and you stayed for the whole meeting, that is excellent. I think one thing that we really need to work on is your assertiveness skills because I've been telling her is like, it's like right now we're giving you a small service learning in terms of the community of leaders. Like, what if you're going to step higher to be an RA, or somebody in state board? Like, the board of directors and stuff is like, you got to be more assertive in terms of like these kind of discussions, you gotta be more involved, you be more contributing to the ideas, you got to do that. So that is something that I would talk to her as like, okay, I see now more of the picture of where you are at the baseline. By 12 months, I need to see some improvement in this regard because like this is your goal. Right now, I don't see that your assertiveness is at the level that I want to see right now. Because like, I guess I would phrase it this way, is not on par with some of your aspirations. So that was sort of like how I will approach the conversation like that with her.
Okay. And I know like you talked about how it was challenging finding another OT who was open and discussing having autism. I feel like just a perspective I've noticed in the last couple of years is there seems to be more openness to talking about it. And there seems to be, or there's more individuals who are coming into our field who are openly talking about things. So for example, I know on social media, there is somebody who has titled their social media tag as the autistic OT. Like it just seems
yes,
to be
I do know that
more,
person. Yes, I do.
It just seems to be becoming more open and people becoming aware and letting the world know about what they're doing and what their profession is and different things. So hopefully that's kind of a change we're seeing, like that finding mentorship will not be as hard.
Yes, I do agree with that. I think that, it's like, I think the fact that I've done a lot of presentations and AOTA about autism, I won't say I did it all the time. I've probably about 80% of the time I've done it. So I think that has made an impact. And I think the TED TED Talk, my first TEDx talk, that also made an impact, and also think that the Autism Across the Lifespan book, that is also an underrated one because like I think the Autism Across the Lifespan book that was published, I think that was almost 2 years ago because I remember it was published 2 years ago on Labor Day. So yeah, that was pretty big part because I think the shift on that book, if you take a notice between the third edition and the fourth edition, actually is like the third edition, there's no first person perspective. And then the fourth edition is like, I was the one who contributed forward, and then Stephen Shore, a notable autism self-advocate, he combined, like he collaborated with Christy Koenig to write a chapter on adults with autism with that book. So that is also a pretty big shift. And then I think the aftermath after I contributed forward, I think I mentioned, I think it was like, oh, Bill, like we realized that we want to contribute to the profession, but it was like some of us, we don't have the guts like you do in terms of doing presentations. Like you're so well versed in doing presentations. So like some of us is like we're still a little scared in doing presentations. The fact that you expose us to something like this in terms of doing written work, the fact that we can take our time to get our thoughts and give you the feedback or contribute accordingly, that was very helpful. So it's like, they have to be telling me, it's like, hey, if there are any other opportunities like this, can you just give us a heads up? It's like, of course, whether we want to contribute is up to us, but it's like, at least give us a heads up that it's like, hey, like this is an opportunity for you guys to get involved in it. If you want to get involved in it, just let me know. So that's why you also notice that AOTA also recently published the like roadmaps of opportunities document in autism. So actually that was supposed to be showcased in the AOTA conference had the pandemic not happened. Yeah, so but nonetheless the document is out. I think it was under the autism page in AOTA. So yeah, it was like, it was me as the contributing author, and then the autistic OT, aka Sarah Hernandez, and then another autistic OT, Melissa James. They both were contributing authors to the document. So that has been a lot of positive changes that have been going on since this past decade.
That's super exciting because I know there is a big push, and I think OTs should and would be one of the first ones to push for this. Is we need more autistic individuals who are speaking about their perspective instead of us. It needs to be first person. We need their input. They need to be on boards, and on their perspective needs to be out there way more than it is.
Yeah, I think the hard part is like, AOTA conference is like the sensory stimulus, the sensory environment is so overloading, it's so overwhelming. I remember like Melissa James, who I talked about earlier, like she needs like a lot of sensory breaks. I think she went to 2 AOTAs. I think Chicago, right? Chicago was 2016. I think the year before, I forgot where it was like, yeah, she was there for 2 years, but then I know that she took a lot of outside breaks just to make sure she's handling okay. And I think when she found out that the 2017 conference was in Philly, I think there was like, no thanks, it's like 12,000 people. That's a lot of people, and I don't think I can cope with that environment. So it's like, that is the accessibility piece,
Right.
So that is something that, yeah, it's like, yeah, it's like, it's like, it seems like on paper, it's like, okay, you can submit a paper to present, whether it's a poster or a short course or pre-conference institute, but the thing is like, AOTA cannot change AOTA in terms of the conference, There's going to be a lot of people to attend no matter what. You can't change that kind of environment, So it's like, what can you do, So it's like, but then and then of course, like the international conferences I do is like, yeah, it's actually a lot less people. I think the RCOT, the most I've seen was like 1,500 people. So it's like those kind of conferences is a lot more intimate, but at the same time, it's like you go to different parts of the world and the travel is expensive. So that is also another barrier. If you understand what I mean.
Yeah. So you mentioned about conferences, and I know you were speaking for both. You spoke on her challenges with the sensory input, and then also a little bit of yours. How do you prep for that? And then also, like, how do you prep and plan for addressing those needs?
Good question. I think this strategy has changed since I became an OTR. You know, it's like when you're OTR, right? Or of course you were COTA before. You know, it's like you have a job, you have some money, so it's like, hey, and then of course when you're a student, right? So it's like, okay, it's like you gotta come to conference on this day, and then you gotta return home to this day because like, hey, there's an exam coming up or class coming up. You don't want to miss class and stuff. You don't want to do that, you know. So for me as a practitioner, what I've done is that I give myself space in my schedule. So I think that I like to go to a lot of conferences and realize that my value to travel around the world. I think that's very important. But at the same time, it's like I need my sort of relatively quiet time, so to speak. I mean, I don't mind like, okay, I go on a tour with other people and stuff, but at least it's like I don't have to think about OT, so to speak. So I think for me, it's like usually I would come like 2 or 3 days before the conference, and then maybe I'll leave like a day or two after, especially if it's a big one like AOTA or like the World Federation Conference. And then of course I was always disguise it as like, you know what, as like I can use some time to tour around the surroundings, you know. So at least that would sound like less stigmatizing, because it's like part of it's true, but part of it's not, you know. So I've been using that as like sort of my decompressed time, so to speak. And then of course, you know me, like I like to play golf. So that also
You would
has
talk
been
about
very,
it.
yeah, it's like I've posted some pictures from here and there on Facebook, but it's like I like to play golf. I think that was a very good for me. It's like I guess it's like some people that like nature, they like to walk, they like to hike, you know, they like to run. For me, it's like I for me running is pretty boring. Hiking, I don't. I think for me it's like I think I hiked a couple times when I was at WFOT. It's like no, hiking is not for me unless it is like a important landmark, you know, for me to see, to experience, you know. I won't do that. That's not me. So for me, it's like golfing sort of is perfect for me because like math was actually my background. So for me, it's like, I don't know. I'm still have a little bit of math geek in me because like I like to do, I don't know. It's like there's a math thing called game theory. I use that every time when I go out and play golf. Yeah, so therefore it's like, yeah, I know it's like, so therefore I dispelled the notion that OTs don't like math. I do.
I did not enjoy statistics, I can tell you that. And I know that's your
I
background.
know, game theory is more advanced stuff than that, you know?
It's true. I don't think the average OT or OT student going in enjoys the statistics in math requirements.
I know. I think it's like, speaking of that, I think when I was in OT school, when everybody found out my background, right? And then when like some of my classmates they found about me, I told them, I was like, oh, by the way, I aced the GRE math test. I was like, get out of here. Why are you here studying with us? It's like you should be in a stats program, you should be in business school, you should be in your graduate school for math. I was like, why are you in OT?
Well, I think you ended up where you're supposed to.
I think too. I think so. You know what? It's like I also think that speaking of that, I think it's like I think when the admissions people they admit me, they thought that I'll be the type that I would produce research. So I think I took a roundabout way to get involved in research. I think it is. I think last year was probably the first meaningful year that I can say like, you know what, I have come back to sort of doing research. But it's not quantitative research that I think that admissions people that will hoping. Instead, it's more qualitative because I think a lot of autism research is qualitative, you know? So I think it's like I end up in the research route in a sense, at least I get a taste of it now. So, hey, you know, I think, and of course, now me being in the MSOT program, I've been trying to tell my department is like, hey, you know what? I don't mind leading like thesis groups, especially considering that I have interest in terms of doing autism research. So I was like, hey, you know what? I could definitely lead some interesting research here and there because like now I have some friends that are in autism research. I can always pick on the brain a little bit, and of course also like collaborating, so to speak. So yeah, actually I know the Australian version of Christy Koenig. Her name is Caroline Mills. It was like I met her at WFOT 6 years ago. And I think last year was the first time that she approached me for a conversation. It's like, hey Bill, it was like, I want you to be part of the research team that I'm in. I get my PhD students in, so like I want to be part of it because I think I tried to talk to her about like, hey, you know what? My CV is like it's taking shape, but one area of my weakness is like, hey, I don't have enough publications. And I don't have really much research under my name. I don't count the conferences that I present at the Australian or the Canadian conferences because like their format is like, it's like, dude, it's like a lot of the stuff that I present over there is like what I just try to adapt to the abstract submission format, So it's like I don't consider that as research because people like, you don't want to be like the judge, jury, executioner of this kind of research. Like, I mean, from time to time, it's like, hey, we understand that you're trying to fit the format of the conference. But at the same time, it's like, we need you to do some form of stuff. So it's like, hey, I can get you in. So we'll see how it goes,
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, now it's like, this is the thesis group. I think it's perfect.
So you might still get some statistics out of your career and some math.
Well, I will say it's more qualitative because autism stuff is more qualitative, unfortunately, But which just means just fine because I'm a very analytical person.
Okay, so we did some research on you. Besides what I know, are you still self-employed with Autism Unites and GoToCare?
No, that is false. That's false.
Okay, so you're
That is false.
currently just working at the skilled nursing facility?
And then Stanbridge University.
Oh,
That's
yeah.
pretty much. I think, yeah, I just, and then GoToCare is like, well, it was like that thing that never worked out. So don't count that, please.
Okay.
Yeah, it's like the golfing thing. That's like, don't count that.
So I know you're super passionate about occupational therapy and being on social media and using social media as a tool and platform. Can you tell us how you kind of got started? Like, how did that become so like a passion for you?
I think we go back to, I think earlier we mentioned that I was a struggling student, right? So I think at that time, my attitude when I found out that the diagnosis, and then on top of that, I definitely was among the bottom dwellers amongst my classmates. So it's like, you know what? If OT were not successful, I want to go down swinging. So that was actually my initial design of my social media. And then I think after, because like, I think that was like, I think I mentioned that I spent a year like looking for someone in OT who is autism. So that's why I was like, that's something I noticed that I did that was very different compared to other autistic OTs that had come to me or autistic OT students that has come to me. It was very different. So, and then of course, when I became successful on OTR, being out there and what I've done. So at the same time, it's like, you know what? I want to make it my presence loudly so that it's like, hey, you know what? As we mentioned about earlier, right? Like, I don't want people to experience the same struggles as I did. Because like, I was lucky to have a year, to sort of like get myself back together, so to speak, before I get back to field work. But sometimes a year, in terms of any kind of OT curriculum, whether it's OT or OTA, that can be the difference between like making it or dropping out of the program. So you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that
A
can be
lot
like,
can happen
it's almost like life or death,
So I've heard you talk about seeking out mentorship and I know you are a mentor. Like, what's been the importance of having good mentorship for you? Because I know you had Terry was a good mentor of yours, but you've had tons of mentors. What's been the importance for you?
I think for me, it's like, especially given me have an aspiration as leader, I think that, you know what? I mean, although I'm involved in AOTA, but at the same time, it's like, you know what? I don't want to make decisions that I will regret later. So therefore, it's like the AOTA front is like, you know what? Like people like Sean Phipps and stuff, or Barbara Conblau, I was like, sometimes it's like in terms of some kind of these like board of directors positions or like further up in the RA and stuff, it's like, I probably need them to tell me, it's like, okay, what does this role entail? Like, what do I have to do? And then of course I just told them it's like, don't give me your opinion, just tell me the facts, what my role would be if I were to be in it. And then I'll be the judge to see is like, hey, you know, this role is perfect for me or this role is not perfect for me. So I still need that kind of information. Yeah, I put it that way. I think I'm going to go tangent a little bit about like the TEDx stuff because I think initially when I got the license to curate a TEDx event, I think a lot of people, they're like, Bill, this is exciting, you know, it's like, this is the next big thing after the Rose Parade float. And it's like, it's very cool to have an OT behind this initiative, you know, it's like, we want to see you do well and we want to see that, you know, it's like you continue on to do more rather than one and done, you know? Mm-hmm. So, but then as time went on, I realized I was like, oh my gosh, this requires a lot of executive functioning skills. And this also like requires me to lead under pressure because it is a very pressure-packed project. So that, like, as time went on, is almost like, damn it, I almost want to regret it. Because like that, I mean, like, it's good and stuff that I was very bold in just trying this because I know I am like a lab rat in the sense. It's like, hey, I'm trying to do this out for OT, whether it works out or not, it's like, I know that it's like, hey, you know what, I'll give a genuine effort to see whether it works for me or not, or work for OT or not. But I think going back to that story was like, okay, you know what, now having done curating a TEDx event, I sort of realized like, okay, probably cannot be AOTA president or some kind of very high pressure role, you know? So I was like, that is like, I think my leadership style is like, although I'm very likable, very personable, but at the same time is that if adversity hits, I could become a Donald Trump. So therefore, that is like, okay, it's like, this kind of role doesn't suit me. So it's like, so that was why I want my mentors to give me some objective opinion, pretty much, so to speak. Yeah, that's what I need them for.
So flipping that coin of mentorship, how have you benefited from being others' mentor?
You know what? Mentorship is like a two-way street. I think that is what I had with Terry, was that at that time it was like, I think at that time with Terry, it was like she was trying to shape me up and be a better professional. And then at the same time, it's like I try to teach her a little bit about the nuances of social media. And of course, a lot of things changed since then, you know, but at the same time, it's like, I think there's like, the fact that making a two-way street, I think is very enjoyable. And the fact that I give back to the profession is also very good because I know that I owe OT a lot. So that was another motivation for me to give back as much as I could. And I think because I enjoyed the mentorship piece, now I think like, now that was one of the reasons that I want to go to academia because like, hey, I think although sometimes I'm not the most patient person in the world, but I also know that a lot of strong qualities that would fit the mentor. And of course, like the fact that I worked very hard for what I got, I think that is going to be very good quality to show not only to my mentees, but also to my students. I think that is very, very important.
I think you're right. Like mentorship really is the most beneficial when it is a two-way street. When you're giving and getting, it seems to reap the most benefits for both parties. So you brought up the TEDx community and the events. Where do you see yourself going next with your involvement in the TEDx community?
Actually, that's what I've been using on posting on Facebook recently. So a lot of stuff that I've been going on. There's a testicles initiative that's been going on since last fall, actually. So pretty much, simple view is community media club. That is sort of like that. So I think the initial design was like, oh, you gather a place offline and stuff. Like for example, your school, there's like 12 of you, gather over lunch, gather over dinner, and watch a TED. You guys would watch a TEDx talk together, and then you just debrief upon what you just saw. So something like that. And then the online format, it has really changed the ballgame because like now become involved in so many global conversations. Not only being part of these kind of global conversations, but also like facilitating these kind of global conversations. And then I think like participating in almost 50 to 60 of these, I think I'm like a junkie now in terms of these kind of things more than anybody in OT. I think now after doing a lot of task analysis of what can work, what can be used for, I was like, dude, how come this is not promoted as much as like TikTok? I think I read a blog about like TikTok's utility in OT or something like that. You know, it's like if we are talking about TikTok, it's like, dude, we also should be talking about this, especially considering this far more useful than say TikTok, because I realized that hey, you know, it can be an advocacy tool because like if you're a host, there's a theme that matches. So like, hey, maybe I can show an OT TED talk here and there, you know, to my audience that may not know about OT. It's like, hey, I can do that, you know. I'm the host, it's my choice, you know. So that's one way. And then another way I also found is like, hey, it can be a social skills group. Of course, granted that, you know, like a TED talk or TEDx talk, that definitely requires a lot of intelligence to digest the material and then to reflect upon the material. So therefore, it's not a one-size-fits-all kind of social skills group, but at the same time that it can be very beneficial for certain groups like autistic individuals and stuff who are, so basically putting a community-based occupation spin to this kind of social skills group, I think that is very good that we use for that. Another use could be is like, I know another area that OT is lacking, complaining about the involvement is like, hey, how come we are not as involved in transitions, you know? So it's like, well, you know, under the here and now theme, if you are wanting to focus a talk about like, for example, like a group of transition is like, okay, maybe I'll show a talk about like autism, you know, or ADHD, you know, or some kind of specific groups that is like these kind of stories and stuff. So it's like, hey, maybe I can run a group like this, you know, that is very relevant to this quote unquote community because like we got to know about the transition journeys of people from adolescent to adults or the last journey, so to speak. I think that could be very beneficial as well. And then of course, like given there are a lot of talks about mental health, so it can also be used for like a mental health group, you know? So that can also be, because like in mental health groups, like there's a lot of current events and stuff, like, hey, this qualifies as current events, you know? So like there is that kind of component to it. So I was like, yeah, that's what I've been promoting very hard about the TEDxicles idea, because like it is actually very, I will say it's like, it's pretty fun to do. And it's all compared to running a TEDx event, it actually does not take as much time. And you can control about how frequently you want to do it. And also you can grade it. It was like, hey, maybe I just want to keep it to a private group versus like being wide open, you know? So like, you can also control that, you know? So like, there's a lot of autonomy. Of course, you have to associate with TED brand and stuff, but other than that, like, you know, it is doable. It is doable for OTs. And then sort of drive me nuts is like, hey, how come OTs are not as taking as quickly as like telehealth, so to speak, you know? Yeah, so I think that's the next big thing is like, oh yeah, speaking of that, actually, I think also posted on Facebook that I talked to my university's president on Thursday, like last Thursday, and I want to be part of their initiative about like diversity inclusion. And they're gonna talk to me. They're gonna ask me like to be like the faculty sort of support and mentor to a student-run initiative, like the student-run testicles. So like the students would run the testicles, but the stuff they do, they have been run by me because like, hey, you know what? We still have to be up to standards in terms of tech standards, you know? So I was like, I need to make sure that what they do fulfill the guidelines and stuff. So I was like, so that is what I would be there for because like my intention for the test proposal is like, I don't want to feel like class because like people already tired of class already. And in fact, make it student centered. I think they can be very creative, like whether it's the icebreakers or perhaps the discussion questions and stuff, or perhaps like facilitated takeaways or how they want to organize the discussion and stuff. It's like, hey, I'll be supporting you. If you just run by me, either I okay it or I'll give you some suggestions to make it better. That is all I'm doing. So yeah, it's like pretty much it's like aside from my own personal test circles I'm running, I'm also going to be setting up some test circles at the university I teach at.
Super cool. So we kind of just talked about the TEDx community and your personal role in it. Where do you see, like, do you think OT has a role in their community? I mean, you kind of talked about your personal, but like the profession as a whole, like, do you see?
I actually do. I mean, like, of course, we have like 50 to 60 talks already. In terms of the TEDx world, we have a lot already. So this is great. I think we have more than PT. I think we have more than SLP. But don't quote me on that because I don't know if it's true or not. But at the same time, I think that, but I think one thing that OT has to do that is not really in line with the TEDx community. I think the TEDx community, like their culture, they're very used to having a lot of occupational imbalance. It's pretty much the norm. I mean, the reason why I said that, I think is like I saw a community survey that was run amongst the TEDx organizers. And I think, although it was a small sample, I think 80% of them said, oh, I spent 11 to 20 hours a week to work on my TEDx event. That is how hard I work. Well, you know, it's like, if I say that to fellow OTs, it's like, dude, these people are insane. It's like, don't they need occupational balance, you know? 11 to 20 hours a week on top of what they do for a living? And some even spend like 40 hours a week to do this. Or like, did these people ever sleep? So I think, yeah, because I think it's like, back to the leadership stuff that we do, we are familiar with, right? Like the RA, or even like the LTC, or even like state association committees, is like, I bet if we said, oh, by the way, this committee, we need you to spend 11 to 20 hours every week to be on top of it, to be involved in this. Yeah, I put it that way. It's like, that's a pretty big turnoff for a lot of people. Because a lot of people are like, oh, I got kids, or like, I got 2 jobs, or work on weekends, what can I do, So it's like, I think it's like, for OT to be really involved in this, it's like, I think part of it is like, we have to adapt to the culture, and then don't judge on it. I think right now, for OT is like, we are not there yet. That said, I think the testicles initiative, I think that could be a good beginning because I think it's like the commitment level is not that much. And I think that it could be a good way to sort of, actually, I think there was someone who said it back to us today. It's like, oh, we got to branch out a little bit, to spread the awareness of our profession. I think the fact that it's like, hey, it's like, if you do these testicles, I think it's like, that could be a good opportunity, like especially those are run by TEDx events and stuff. So who knows, like maybe there could be more talks about OT if you strategically join. Like, oh, for example, like there's one tomorrow that I'm joining. It's like TEDx Sunnydale that I know the organizer pretty well since the pandemic. I think it's like, yeah, it's like maybe that's a way. It's like, hey, that could be a way for these kind of hosts to get to know you, because I think one of the things that I heard about is like, in terms of recommendations to get to TEDx events, to speak at them, it's like, hey, and it's like, sometimes it's the personal connections. So therefore, it's like, of course, I don't qualify anymore because like, I don't want to go on the third one because like, I'm gonna get criticized from the TEDx community. It's like, why are you going for your third one when you're supposed to be protecting the brand. So therefore, I was like, there is like maybe like not right now, but maybe years down the line, it's like, okay, it's like it's already 10 years or 13 years since you're TEDx, you know? Maybe now you will go to speak another one. But it's like, I think it's like that could be the way to create some intimate relationships with these TEDx teams and stuff. And who knows, you know? That could be in one way. I think another way is I know a lot of people have been giving me a lot of backlash on me about this, is that I want entry-level OTE students to curate these events as their capstone projects. Because I think my rationale at the time was like, you know, it's like these capstones typically is about 12 months, give or take a few months, you know? And then like how long a TEDx license is, it's like 12 months. So I was like, hey, that fits. And then from a bigger standpoint, I think some programs, they require like 20 to 30 hours on it or 40 hours on it during the capstone time. So because I think the capstone experience is like about 540 or 560, something like that. So I was like, okay, that is something that actually matches the bigger of capstone. Of course, the only con is that, well, unless we have a specific type of license, which I don't think anybody in OT has accomplished that yet. So it's like, unfortunately, the experience is not going to be paid. And I think so that is one. And then I think another one is like, well, I know students will be arguing is like, why are we spending a year of our capstone doing something that is not clinical, that is something that is where it's like, I mean, yeah, you're exposing us to multidisciplinary collaboration, but it's different kind of multidisciplinary. I sort of explained to them, I was like, well, you know, it's like we have doctoral students doing their internships at AOTA before. We have doctoral students doing some internship even at my state association before. So I was like, it's no different than that, you know? I mean, yes, there'll be a lot of rules and regulations because it's TED, you know? But at the same time, it's like, you know, there's also a lot of autonomy in this project. But that said, it's like, if I'm the one who's shoulder the bill, I need to make sure you spend responsibly. Because like, hey, if you are not responsible for the debts, if your program is not responsible for it, then I need it, you know? Because TED is not going to reimburse me. It's like, oh, this event is short for $5,000. And then your program says like, oh, we're not going to reimburse you for $5,000. And then you're the students like, I'm not going to pay you $5,000 to absorb this. Then I got to say, it's like, that's one of the safeguards I got to do because it is what it is, you know? Like, hey, it's like, it's not my practice license on the line, but, you know, you are putting me in financial jeopardy, you know? It's like, if you spend lavishly, you spend like $10,000 over, then it's on my credit.
Mm-hmm.
So therefore, that's the problem. So that's what I think is like, I think getting the mental hurdle that we can't do these kind of things, I think that is number one. Because I've seen like university students, they actually pull it off. From other disciplines, I've seen it, they pull it off, no problem. So the fact that we are making excuses, I think is like, instead of saying that we can do this, then like, okay, how can we do this? I think that's a more appropriate question is like, how can we make this work instead of what can't work?
Okay, so I have one final question for you.
Sure.
What type of advice do you have for new OT practitioners wanting to go maybe in non-traditional settings or who had a non-traditional path?
Oh man, this is not my expertise at all. I think, you know, you should ask your fellow rep, Jenny Cook. She probably has, yeah, I remember she did an OT Leadership Live podcast with us. Yeah, she will probably be more familiar with this than I do.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, like you use your RA connections, right?
Just was curious on what your perspective was, but I definitely could reach out to her. Melissa, any questions? No, I kind of can hear you.
Nope, I'm good, but thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us.
Yeah, I think it's like, I know, I'm like, I think as autistic people would say, it's like, I've been info dumping like crazy.
Um, so we will let you go. Thank you so much, Bill, and have a good night.
I'll see you later.
Bye.
I'll see you next year then.
Bye.